She drove 4 hours without calling first. She told herself it was because she was worried. 3 days without a text back. 3 days was unusual, even for Daniel, who was not what anyone would call an eager communicator. She'd sent 4 messages, a check-in on Wednesday, a photo of the recipe she'd made that he used to like, Thursday, a news article Friday morning that she'd thought he'd find interesting. And then, Friday evening, just, "Daniel, can you let me know you're okay?" Nothing. So she drove. She had a key. She'd had a key to every apartment he'd lived in since he turned 23, which she'd asked for each time he moved, and which he'd provided each time, quietly, without warmth and without argument, the way he provided things she asked for. "Here is the key. Here is the thing you need." "No, please, don't need anything else for a while." She didn't understand that second part yet. She used the key to get into the vestibule, and then she knocked on 4B and waited. And when the door opened, she had 2 seconds before his face organized itself into the face he used for her. 2 seconds of the actual thing underneath. She saw it and didn't know what she was seeing, and moved past it into the worry and the explanation. 3 days, 4 hours. She just needed to know he was okay. He stepped back to let her in. She would think about those 2 seconds for a long time. She'd seen something in his face before he had time to put the other version on. She didn't have a word for it yet. She'd find a word later, on the drive home, when she'd turned the image over enough times to finally see it clearly. He'd look like someone who'd been found somewhere they thought was safe. Some people love hard and never ask what the loving costs the person on the receiving end. If you've ever been on either side of that, this is that story. Subscribe before we keep going. Linda Marsh was 63 years old. She'd retired 8 months ago from 28 years as an administrative coordinator at a school district in Columbus, Ohio, which had given her more time to notice that her son didn't call as often as she'd like. She would have told you, without hesitation, that she was a devoted mother. She would have been telling the truth. The devotion was real, genuinely, completely, without performance or calculation. She had organized a significant portion of her adult life around Daniel's well-being, and she'd done it mostly alone, after his father left when Daniel was 9. And that fact, the aloneness of it, the sustained specific weight of single parenthood, was something she'd been carrying for 25 years without quite putting it down. She hadn't said this to Daniel, not directly, not as a complaint, but it was there, in the background of her accounting, an anchor that gave the sacrifice weight. She'd done it alone. She wanted him to know she'd done it alone, even if she never said it. Daniel was 34. He lived in Cleveland, worked as an urban planner for the city, and called on Sundays. Most Sundays, not all. The calls were 15 to 20 minutes. They covered his work in general terms, her health in general terms, the weather. They were not the calls she wanted. She'd been interpreting the gap between what he offered and what she wanted as a failure of his feeling, a measure of how much he'd grown away from her. She'd been wrong about this interpretation. She was going to find out how wrong in the next 24 hours. His apartment building was in a Cleveland neighborhood in the middle of changing. A coffee shop, a bookstore, 2 still boarded buildings from the previous decade. The block had the slightly provisional quality of a place that hadn't decided yet what it was going to be. She'd been here twice before, once when he moved in, once for his birthday last spring. Both times she'd noticed things she didn't say, which was its own way of saying them. She'd looked at his kitchen on the first visit and asked if he'd considered different shelving. She'd mentioned, on the birthday visit, that the rug in the living room had seen better days. She'd said it the way she said these things, not unkindly, not with any intent to wound, just as information, just as participation. She was interested in his life. She was engaged. She was the opposite of a mother who didn't care. She didn't know yet that this was the thing, that these small, well-intentioned observations were not being received as interest. She didn't know yet that Daniel had a place in his interior where he filed these moments, and that the file was thick, and that it went back farther than she'd imagined. She knocked on 4B. He opened the door and looked at her for 2 seconds with the face she didn't have a word for yet, and then she was already talking. The 3 days, the 4 hours she'd been worried. She just needed to know he was okay, and he stepped back and said, "Come in, Mom," in the voice he used for things he'd decided not to escalate. He was okay. He was standing in his own apartment on a Tuesday evening, and he was okay. She could see that. She let herself settle into it. He made tea because she'd mentioned wanting tea without being asked. He set it on the table in front of the couch. He sat in the chair across from her, not beside her on the couch, which she noticed and didn't comment on. "Why haven't you answered my messages?" she said. "I had a hard week," he said.
"I was off my phone.
"What happened?"
"A work thing. It's handled."
"What kind of work thing?" "Mom." Not sharp, measured. The calibrated voice. "I handled it." "It's okay." "I'm just asking," she said. "I know," he said. She looked around the apartment. At the books on the shelves, organized in a way she found slightly inefficient. At the print on the wall he'd had since his late 20s, at the window with the November street below. It was his life, fully and specifically his, accumulated around him. She felt like a visitor. She didn't expect to feel like a visitor. She was his mother. After tea, she asked about work again, and he gave her the general version again. She asked about his friend Marcus, and he said Marcus was good. She asked about the woman he'd mentioned once, in passing, 3 months ago, and he looked at her with the expression that meant that particular door was closed. "I'd rather not get into that," he said. "I'm just asking." "I know." "You never tell me anything," she said, and then, because she could hear how it sounded and didn't want it to become a scene, "I just want to know your life, Daniel." He was quiet for a moment. "Mom," he said, "can I ask you something?" She looked at him. "Did you drive 4 hours because you were worried?" he said, "or because you wanted to check on things?" She opened her mouth. She closed it. "Those aren't different," she said. He held her eye. "Sometimes they are," he said. The apartment was quiet. She wanted to say something and stopped herself, and they both saw the stopping, and neither of them commented on it, and that was the first small thing, that she'd stopped and he'd noticed. She stayed the night because it was late, and 4 hours was 4 hours. He put sheets on the couch without being asked, efficiently, without complaint. She lay on it after he'd gone to bed and looked at his ceiling and thought about what he'd asked. "Did you drive 4 hours because you were worried or because you wanted to check on things?" She thought, "Those aren't different." She thought, "Are they?" She didn't sleep well. In the morning he made coffee. She made eggs because she knew where things were, and it gave her hands something to do. He sat at the kitchen table and watched her at the stove with the particular watchfulness she'd been reading for years as Daniel being Daniel. Private, quiet, self-contained. She was starting to wonder if it was something else. "I was thinking," she said, not looking up from the eggs, "that the shelves in your office could use some reorganizing." "I noticed your files are—" "Mom." She looked up. He was looking at the table. His coffee cup was in both hands. "I don't want to do this," he said. "I know what you're doing," he said. Still quiet, still the calibrated voice. "You're noticing things. You always notice things when you visit, and then you mention them, and I'm supposed to, I don't know, be grateful, or fix them, or explain myself. I'm not saying you've done anything wrong. You said my shelves need reorganizing. I said they could be more." "They're my shelves," he said. Not sharp, just clear. "They're organized the way I use them." She set the spatula down. She looked at her son at his kitchen table. 34 years old, patient in the way she'd always called it, Daniel's patience, which she was starting to understand was not patience so much as practiced endurance. Something he'd been building for a long time, the way you build something when you expect to need it. "I'm trying to help," she said. "I know you are," he said. "Then why does it feel like I'm not welcome here?" He looked up at her. He held her gaze for a moment. "Mom," he said, "can we talk about something? Something I've been—" He stopped. The internal measure, the calculation. She'd watched him do this his whole life, the weighing of things before he said them, and she'd called it being thoughtful. She was now understanding that sometimes it was the calculation of whether the cost of saying a thing was worth it. Something I've wanted to say for a long time. She sat down. She thought, here it is. The conversation I've been bracing for. She expected something about the key, or the visits, or some version of a limit he was about to draw. She prepared herself. She was not prepared for what he did instead. He stood up and went to the second bedroom. She heard a drawer open. He came back with an envelope and set it on the table. her handwriting on the front. Her name, his return address from the Lakewood apartment he'd had 6, 7 years ago. "What is this?" she said. "A letter I wrote you," he said, 7 years ago. She looked at it. "I didn't send it," he said. "I wrote it, and I couldn't send it, and I put it away. I've moved it twice. I've thought about throwing it away." He looked at the envelope. "I haven't." "Why are you showing me now?" He sat back down. "Because you drove 4 hours without calling," he said, "and because I watched you walk in, and your first instinct was the shelves." He paused. "And because I'm tired of carrying it alone. If there's a letter you've written and never sent, leave something in the comments. Tell me what was in it. Tell me if you think you'll ever show it to the person it was for." Sometimes writing it is enough. Sometimes it isn't. She picked up the envelope. Her name, his handwriting on the inside, 3 pages, the precise, slightly cramped script she'd watched him develop from printed letters in 2nd grade. She recognized it the way you recognize the handwriting of someone you've loved since they were small enough to hold. She read. The first page was context. He was writing it, he said, because he'd been trying to find a way to say something for years, and every time he tried to say it out loud, something happened. She got hurt, or he retreated, or the conversation became about something else, and he was going to try to write it instead, and he didn't know yet if he was going to send it. The second page was the thing itself. "I feel when I'm with you like I'm always being assessed. I want to be clear that I know this isn't what you intend. I know you love me. I've never doubted that you love me, but there is always a grade being issued. There is always a thing I've done that could have been done better, a choice I've made that you'd have made differently, a version of my life, visible from where you're standing, that would be more correct than the one I'm living. And I know you believe you're helping. I know that in your understanding, pointing at the gap between what is and what could be better is a form of care. I know this because I watched you do it for 30 years, and I never once saw you understand it as anything other than devotion. But Mom, it is exhausting to be the thing that is always being improved. It is exhausting to have someone love you in a way that requires you to be different than you are. I have spent most of my adult life managing the distance between who I am and who you seem to need me to be. And the management is work I do every time I call you, every time you visit, every time I'm about to tell you something and I stop and think about how you'll receive it, and whether the receiving will turn into a comment about what I should do differently. I don't tell you things because the telling always becomes a lesson. I don't show you my life because the showing becomes an assessment of my life. I hold you at a distance that I know hurts you, and I'm sorry for the hurting. Genuinely, I'm sorry. But the distance is the only way I know to stay in the relationship without losing myself inside it. She stopped reading. She looked up. Daniel was looking at the table. His coffee had gone cold. The eggs were on the stove, probably overdone by now, and neither of them were looking at the eggs. "Keep going," he said quietly. "There's more." She looked back at the letter. "I want to tell you about the birthday. Not my birthday, your birthday. The year I was 27. I'd planned something. I'd made a reservation. I was going to take you to dinner. I thought about it for 2 weeks. And when you got there, you spent the first 20 minutes of the dinner telling me the restaurant wasn't as good as the one on 5th Street. And then you asked whether I was getting enough sleep because I looked tired. And then you asked if I'd thought more about the job offer in Columbus because you'd talked to someone who said the city planning department there was good and it would be closer. And I sat there and I thought, she has no idea. She has absolutely no idea that she's doing this. I've never told you this. I'm not sure why I'm telling you now, except that the birthday has stayed with me, and I've never been able to explain to you why. And I think the reason is that it was the first time I understood that what you were doing wasn't going to change. Not because you're a bad person. Because you can't see it. I hope you can see it. I hope by the time I'm writing to you, I've figured out a way to help you see it. Because I don't want to keep growing farther away from you. I don't want this distance to become permanent. I just don't know how to be close to you and also be myself at the same time. And until I can figure that out, the distance is what I have. She set the letter on the table. She sat. The kitchen was the specific quiet of a room where something has happened that is going to take time to settle. Outside the window, Cleveland was doing its November morning, A truck somewhere. The sound of the city going about its business at 8:30 a.m. with total indifference to the two people at the kitchen table. She thought about the birthday dinner.
She remembered it. She remembered the restaurant.
She genuinely thought it wasn't as good as the one on 5th Street, which was a fact, which was a true assessment of two restaurants, which had seemed worth mentioning. She remembered saying he looked tired. She remembered the Columbus job offer because she'd heard about it and thought it was a good opportunity and thought she was being helpful by raising it. She had no memory of his face during any of this. She hadn't been watching his face. She'd been watching the things she wanted to make sure got said. The birthday dinner, she said. Yeah, he said. I didn't know, she said. I know you didn't, he said. I thought I was. She stopped. She could hear the defense forming, and she could hear it the way you can sometimes hear yourself from slightly outside, the familiar shape of it. I was trying to help. I was being practical. I was interested. I was there. She heard the shape of it, and she stopped before it came out. He watched her stop. I've been waiting for you to do that my whole life, he said. Just stop. She looked at him. You've said things, she said, that were critical of me, and then stopped. And I always thought you stopped because you'd thought better of it, because you decided to be fair to me. Sometimes, he said, and sometimes I stopped because I'd done the math on how the conversation would go if I kept going. You'd feel attacked, and then you'd be hurt, and then I'd spend the rest of the visit managing your hurt, and by the end, I'd be exhausted, and nothing would have changed, and I'd have less energy for the next time. He paused. It was easier to stop. That's been happening, she said, for years. For years, he said. She put her hands on the table. She looked at them. She thought about the accounting she'd been keeping. The single-parent years, the blessings she'd counted in hard seasons, the sacrifice she'd made and not made a scene about, the way she told herself she gave without expecting return, even as she expected return in a specific, unnamed way. The return of Daniel being close, Daniel calling, Daniel letting her in. She'd been keeping an account, and the account said she was owed something, and the something was access. Access to his life, access to his choices, access to the living of it, so she could see and assess and make sure things were going as well as they should be. The account was real. The sacrifice had been real. But she was seeing, sitting at her son's kitchen table, with a letter she'd never been meant to read, that the account didn't work the way she'd thought. That you couldn't earn your way into a person's interior, that access wasn't a debt, and love wasn't a debt. And the years of doing it alone, as real as they were, didn't create an entitlement to a version of Daniel that Daniel hadn't chosen to be for her. Can I tell you something? She said. He waited. Your grandmother, she said. My mother. He looked at her. She was like this, Linda said. She didn't know she was like this. She thought she was the most attentive mother in the world because she noticed everything, and noticing everything was how she showed she cared. Linda looked at the table. I grew up thinking that attention meant assessment, that love came with a grade attached, that being seen by someone who loved you meant being evaluated by them. She paused. And then I had you, and I thought, I'm going to be so present. I'm going to be so involved. I'm going to be the opposite of a mother who doesn't care. Daniel was very still. I didn't understand, she said, that I was doing the same thing she did. I thought I'd changed the form of it, so I thought I'd changed the thing itself. You didn't, he said. Gently, but clearly. I know, she said. I'm starting to understand I didn't. He held his coffee cup. She looked at the letter on the table. 3 pages. The handwriting of her son at 27, trying to say the thing he didn't know how to say out loud, putting it in an envelope with her name on it, and then not sending it, moving it with him twice, carrying it for 7 years. I don't want this distance to become permanent. I need to ask you something, she said. He waited. The things I've said to you, she said. The noticing, the suggestions. Was there ever a time when it felt, was any of it helpful? Did any of it land as what I meant it to be? He considered this. When I was a kid, he said. When I was small. Yeah, it felt like you were paying attention. Like nothing got past you, which felt safe sometimes. He paused. But somewhere in high school it shifted. I started to understand that the noticing wasn't just present. It had a direction. It was always pointing at what needed to be different. He looked at her. And by the time I was in college, I'd stopped bringing you things I cared about because I knew how the receiving would go. What do you mean? She said. How the receiving would go? You'd have a response, he said. Not a bad response, not a mean one, but a response that was organized. Like you'd already assessed it and had the notes ready. He paused. I told you once about a project I was working on in grad school. A community development proposal I was excited about. She tried to remember. She had a vague memory. Daniel and something about a project, a proposal. I don't fully. You asked if I'd thought about whether the market for that kind of work was stable, he said, before I'd finished explaining what the project was. She looked at the table. It was a practical question, she said. It was, he said. I know it was. But I've been working on it for 3 months, he said. And I was excited, and I wanted to show you something I'd made, and the first question was about job market stability. He said it without accusation, just with the flat clarity of something that had been true for a long time and was finally being said. And after that, I stopped telling you about projects I was excited about. She sat with this. She thought about the accounting again, the sacrifice, the single-parent years, the devotion. She held all of it, and she tried to hold alongside it the other accounting, the one she'd never been doing, the one that had been running on Daniel's side of the table without her knowledge. The projects he'd stopped showing her, the things he'd stopped saying, the birthday dinner where she'd spent 20 minutes on the restaurant, and the Columbus job offer, and his tired face while he sat across from her, and she hadn't once asked what he'd been excited about lately, what he was reading, what had been good. She hadn't asked what had been good. She'd been so focused on what could be better. The letter, she said. You wrote that I can't see it, that you hoped I could. Do you think... She stopped. Can I? See it? He held a gaze. You're seeing it right now, he said. That's different from seeing it. I don't know what the difference is, she said. The difference is whether it changes anything, he said. Whether next time you come over, your first instinct is steal the shells. She looked at the shelves through the kitchen doorway. She looked at them honestly. She thought, I walked in yesterday, and within an hour I'd mentioned the shelves. She thought, I knew they were fine. I knew he'd organized them for his own use. I mentioned them because there was a comment available and I made it, because making the comment was how I participated, because I didn't know another way to be present that didn't involve pointing at what could be different. I don't know how to not do it, she said. She said it out loud, which surprised her. It surprised her because it was true, and because saying true things to Daniel had not been the pattern. He looked at her. He paused. That's the first time I've heard you say something like that. I know, she said. Usually you say you were just trying to help. I was trying to help, she said. That's also true. Both things are true. She looked at the letter. I was trying to help, and I didn't know how to help in a way that didn't also carry a judgment of what needed helping. He was quiet. I grew up, she said, believing that attention and improvement were the same thing, that you showed love by noticing what needed to change. And she stopped. I applied that to you. I've been applying it your whole life, not because I thought you were failing, because that was the only form I knew. I know, he said. That doesn't make it okay. No, he said, it doesn't. But he stopped. He looked at his hands. It makes it something I can understand, maybe, rather than something that was done to me. The distinction was small and enormous. She looked at the letter. 3 pages. The handwriting of her son at 27, who had been trying for years to close the distance and didn't know how, who'd written the thing and put it in an envelope and moved it twice and not thrown it away, who had still, after everything, not wanted the distance to be permanent. She thought, he still doesn't want it to be permanent. Or he wouldn't have shown me this, she thought. He's been waiting for me to be able to see it. She thought, I've been driving 4 hours to check on shelves. I need to ask you something else, she said. He waited. The reason you kept the letter, she said, the reason you didn't throw it away, was it because you were hoping someday? She couldn't finish the question. He held her eye. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I kept it. because someday...
She looked at the window. The November Cleveland morning was doing its ordinary work outside.
A pigeon on the fire escape across the street. A car pulling out of a parking space. The light, the specific gray of a late fall day that isn't committing to either sun or rain. She thought about the drive down here.
The 4 hours. The specific decisiveness of getting in the car and coming.
The way she'd framed it to herself as care, as being present, as being the kind of mother who showed up. She'd shown up without asking whether showing up was what was needed. She'd had the key, and she'd used the key, and she'd arrived at his door and looked at his shelves and mentioned them within the hour. She thought, the love is real.
The love has always been real, and the love has been doing something to him that I couldn't see because I was inside the love and couldn't see its shape from where I was standing.
I've been calling my worry about you a form of care, she said, for a long time.
He looked at her.
They're not always the same thing, she said. My worry and care for you.
No, he said.
They're not.
My worry is about me, she said.
It's about what I need in order to feel like you're okay, and care is about what you actually need. And I've been calling the first one, the second one for 30 years. He sat very still. She'd gotten there on her own. She could see that this mattered to him, that she'd gotten there herself, without him drawing the line more explicitly, without him having to walk her to the conclusion. She'd arrived at it and said it out loud, and it was true, and they both knew it was true. Yeah, he said. Yeah. I'm sorry, she said. He held his coffee cup. I know you are, he said. I'm not saying it so you'll forgive me right now, she said. I'm saying it because it's true, and I needed to say it. She looked at the letter. I'm going to keep saying it, not just today. I know, he said. I hope so. She looked at him. What do you need from me? She said, going forward. Specifically. He looked slightly surprised. Specifically, he repeated. I want to know, not in general, specifically, what it would look like for me to be in your life in a way that doesn't... She stopped. In a way that leaves you room. He held this for a moment. He was, she realized, not used to being asked specifically. He was used to her arriving with her own ideas of what was needed and implementing them, and the asking, the genuine asking, with space in it for the actual answer, was different. Call before you come, he said. Always. Okay. And when you're here, he said, notice what you want to say about my place, about my choices, about my life, and say maybe half of it. Maybe less. Okay, she said. She meant it. She didn't know if she could do it, but she meant it. And when I tell you something, he said, that the first response be something that isn't organized, something that's just response, just being there in it. She looked at him. I don't know how to do that, she said. I know, he said. That's the thing I need you to try. She looked at the letter on the table. She thought about the birthday dinner 7 years ago. She thought about all the dinners before it and after it. She thought about the graduate school project she'd received with a question about market stability. She thought about the shelves and the rug and the key she'd used to let herself in without calling and the 4-hour drive she'd taken out of worry she'd called care. She thought about her mother, the woman who'd noticed everything, the woman who'd believed that noticing was love and assessment was attention and pointing at the gap was help. She thought about what it had been like to grow up inside that, to be the thing that was always being measured against what it should be. She'd grown up and become a different kind of mother and had done the same thing anyway, because the form had changed, but the impulse underneath it hadn't, because she'd never looked at the impulse itself. She was looking at it now. It was not comfortable to look at. She was 63 years old, and she was looking at the thing she'd been doing to her son for 30 years, and the looking required her to hold something complicated, that the love was real, and the harm was real, and both of those things were true at the same time, and neither one canceled the other. She sat with both of them. She didn't try to make one win. He got up and went to the stove and looked at the eggs, which were overdone but not unsalvageable. He put them on 2 plates without asking and brought them to the table and sat back down. She looked at the plate he'd put in front of her. You didn't have to, she started. I know, he said. They're eggs. They ate. Not in the way you eat when something has been resolved. In the way you eat when something has been opened and you're not sure yet what's on the other side of it, but you're both still in the room, which is itself a thing. She looked at him across the table. At the face she'd been watching since he was born. The face she'd learned and relearned through every version of him. The small version, the teenage version, the young adult version, and now this one. The one that had been putting on a careful face for her visits for years. The one that had 2 seconds of the other face. The real one. When she'd arrived unannounced at the door, she thought, I've been so busy noticing what he was doing that I didn't see who he was. She thought, I've had him in my life for 34 years, and I've been looking at the version I needed and not the version that was actually there. She thought, I'm going to try to look at the version that's actually there.
After breakfast, she helped with the dishes, which they did side by side at the sink without talking, the ordinary domestic quiet of 2 people sharing a kitchen.
She washed. He dried. The November gray was doing something outside the window. Not quite rain, not quite not rain, the sky making up its mind. She thought about the drive back. 4 hours. She'd have time to think, which she needed. She thought about what she was going to do with the thinking. She'd been here before, in a version of this, the moment of understanding. She'd had versions of it before, not about this specifically, but about other things, other patterns she'd been told about, other places where her way of being in the world had cost someone something. She'd had the understanding, and then the day had continued, and the week had continued, and the understanding had been true, but the behavior had not changed as much as the understanding had felt like it would change things, because understanding and changing are different processes, and one does not automatically produce the other. She knew this about herself. She was going to have to take the understanding and do something with it that was not just the feeling of the understanding. She was going to have to build a practice out of it. The things she'd told him she didn't know how to do. Letting the first response be something that wasn't organized. Letting him show her his life without her grading it. She was going to have to notice the impulse to assess and catch it before it came out. And she was going to fail at this sometimes. And when she failed, she was going to need to say so and try again. She was 63 years old, and she was going to have to learn something that should probably have been clear to her at 40 or 30. Or the day he was born. She was going to try anyway. The dishes were done. Daniel dried his hands on a dish towel, and she dried hers, and they stood in the kitchen for a moment. I should drive back, she said, before it gets dark. He nodded. Daniel, she said. He looked at her. I'm going to get it wrong sometimes, she said. Going forward. I'm going to slip into the old thing, and I'm going to say something about the shelves or the whatever version of the shelves it is next time, and I need you to tell me when it happens. Not kindly, not carefully. Just tell me. He held her eye. And I'll try to receive it, she said. Not defend myself. Receive it. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. I can try that. That's all I'm asking, she said. Both of us, trying. She picked up her bag from the couch. She put on her coat. She went to the door. She thought about the key in her purse. She didn't take it out. She didn't offer it back. That felt like a gesture that would make the moment bigger than it needed to be. And she was trying to stop making moments bigger than they needed to be. But she thought about it. She thought, he gave me this key because I asked for it, not because he offered it. I've been using it that way. She thought, I'm going to call next time. Come at Christmas, he said. She looked at him. Not to stay the whole week, he said. But come, a day or two, we can... He paused. I'd like to show you where I go in the neighborhood, the coffee place I like. The bookstore. She looked at him. She thought about all the time she'd been in this neighborhood and gone directly to the apartment. Not because she wasn't interested in where he got coffee. Because she'd been so focused on what she'd come to check on that she hadn't thought to ask what he'd discovered. I'd like that, she said. She meant it with the specific fullness of someone being offered something they hadn't known to ask for. He nodded. She opened the door. Mom, he said. She stopped. The eggs were good, he said. She looked at him. He said it plainly, without ceremony. The eggs were good. A small true thing, offered as its own small thing, without a grade, without more weight than it held. She thought, this is it. This is the thing I've been missing. The small, unremarkable exchange between two people who are just together. Without the assessment underneath it. Thank you, she said. She went out. She took the elevator down and walked through the vestibule and went out into the November air and got in her car. She sat there for a moment. The street outside was the usual Cleveland late morning, ordinary, moving, indifferent. She took the key out of her purse. She looked at it. She put it in the glove compartment, not thrown away, not given back, just not in her pocket anymore, not where she'd reach for it automatically. She was going to call next time. She was going to ask if it was a good time to come. She was going to let him say no if it wasn't a good time and not make it a thing, not be hurt by the no, not turn the no into evidence of distance. She was going to ask about the coffee place and the bookstore and the friend and the woman he'd mentioned once and not followed up on because she'd sensed the door was closed. She was going to ask and then wait, actually wait, for the answer that came at his pace in his time with the parts he chose to include. She was going to fail at some of this. She was 63 years old, and she'd been doing things a certain way for a long time, and the way didn't reverse overnight. She was going to say something that went sideways, and she was going to feel the old hurt when he didn't give her what she'd hoped for, and she was going to have to sit with the hurt without putting it on him. She was going to do it anyway. She started the car. She thought about the letter. I don't want this distance to become permanent. She thought about her son at 27 writing that sentence, putting it in an envelope addressed to her in her own handwriting, and then not sending it, moving it twice. Keeping it, she thought. He gave me something today that he could have withheld. He chose to give it, she thought. I'm going to try to be worth that choice. She pulled out of the parking spot. She drove. The 4 hours were quiet. She didn't listen to the radio for the first hour. She just drove and thought, the gray Ohio November going past on both sides, the flat, familiar landscape of a drive she'd made before. She thought about her mother, about being the thing that was always being measured, about what it had felt like to love someone and still feel like a project to them. She'd known that feeling. She'd carried it into motherhood, and somehow, despite knowing the feeling, despite having lived inside it, she'd reproduced it, not because she'd wanted to, because she hadn't been able to see that she was. She could see it now. She thought, seeing it doesn't undo it, but not seeing it makes sure nothing changes. She thought, he kept the letter. He still doesn't want the distance to be permanent. That's what I have to work with. She thought about Christmas. The coffee place he liked, the bookstore. She thought about what it would look like to be in a neighborhood with her son and follow his lead, to go where he went, to see what he wanted to show her, to receive his life without organizing it. She thought, I don't know how to do this yet. She thought, I'm going to learn. Around the second hour, she turned on the radio. Something quiet, background, the voice of a station she half recognized. She drove. The sky was doing something different now, some specific November light that happened sometimes in this part of the country. The clouds breaking for a few miles and then closing again, the brief gold of it across the flat fields, there and then gone. She watched it go and drove and thought about her son at his kitchen table and the letter and the eggs and the one sentence at the door. The eggs were good, said plainly, offered simply, no grade underneath it. She was 63 years old and she was going to learn how to give that. Not the perfect version, not the transformation, just more of the plain thing, more of the simple offering, more of being in the room with her son without turning the room into an assessment. More space for him to be himself in front of her. That was what he needed. Not a better version of her, the same her, with more space in it, with less of the old impulse filling every available moment. With the impulse noticed and caught, and sometimes, maybe not every time, but more and more, set aside. She thought, it's not too late. She thought, it's late. But it's not too late. She drove the last 2 hours in the gray Ohio dark, and when she got home, she sat in her car for a few minutes in her own driveway, the familiar house, her own lights in the windows. The ordinary evening of a person in their own life. She took out her phone. She typed, got home, drive was fine, thank you for today. She paused. She added, I mean it. She sent it. She sat and looked at the screen for a moment. Then she put the phone in her pocket and got out of the car and went inside. She'd find out in the morning if he'd replied. He had. I know you do. See you at Christmas. She read it standing in her kitchen, coat still on, the house quiet around her. She read it twice.
She set her phone on the counter and stood there for a moment, not doing anything, just standing with it. Then she took off her coat. She hung it up. She went to the kitchen and made tea. She thought about what the work was going to look like. Not in the abstract, specifically. What it would look like the next time she had an impulse to say something about the shelves, or the choices, or the version of his life that looked like it could be more correct. What it would look like to catch that impulse. What it would look like to ask instead of tell, to follow instead of lead, to receive instead of assess. It was not going to be graceful. It was not going to be a story where she understood the thing and then became the person she'd understood she should be. It was going to be slow and imperfect, and sometimes she was going to get it wrong, and she was going to have to say so without making her own getting it wrong into the thing that needed managing. She was going to show up at Christmas and ask about the coffee place. She was going to let him show her. She was going to try, for once, to see what was already there, instead of pointing at what could be different. It was late. It was not too late. She drank her tea. If any part of this stayed with you, if you recognized something in Linda, or in Daniel, or in the space between them, leave something below. Tell me what you'd have needed if you were Daniel. Tell me what you'd have done differently if you were Linda. Tell me if there's still time for the conversation in your own life. Sometimes, just being willing to have it is the first thing that changes. There's a particular kind of love that believes it has to improve the thing it loves to prove it loves it. It comes from somewhere real, from worry, from care, from the specific fear of watching someone you love make choices that look like mistakes and saying nothing. It doesn't come from malice. It comes from the deepest place in a person, the place where the love lives, and it comes out shaped by whatever that person learned love was supposed to look like. Linda had learned that love looked like noticing, like pointing at the gap, like producing a better version. She'd given that to Daniel his whole life. And Daniel, who had loved her back, who had not wanted the distance to be permanent, who had kept the letter through 2 moves and not thrown it away, Daniel had been waiting, quietly, for a version of her love that left him room. She was going to try to give him that. Not perfectly, not all at once. But she was going to try. The tea was good. She didn't say that to anyone. She just thought it and drank it and let it be enough.